Hello and welcome to the Marketing Times Analytics Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Sofronas, and today we're on with Chris Peterson, author of Red and Blue Customers, How to Drive Growth and Manage Risk in Today's Conservative and Liberal Markets. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So tell us about yourself.
I've been in the marketing business on the services side for decades. I founded and sold a couple of digital marketing agencies. I've worked with DTC brands, startups, Fortune 500 brands. And throughout my career, I've always been interested in customer insight and why people do what they do and why people buy what they buy, which is core to marketing if you're going to be successful. That's led me to do a lot of different things, including the book.
That's really interesting. Yeah, so why did you settle on this sort of the political lines as the background for the book?
I came across a piece of research from Pew in December of 2020. And it was an interesting piece of research because it allowed both liberals and conservatives to express to the other side what they wanted the other side to know about them in a very personal way. It was a very open-ended study. And I found that interesting because you don't normally hear the voices of people in research studies. And I read through hundreds of responses. And what struck me was, wow, these are two authentic groups of people who just simply see the world differently. And if that's true, then how does this affect what they buy? And so I became really intrigued in the topic and I started researching it. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that these were in fact two different markets that we don't look at. We don't look at our customers through this lens. And I think one reason is because the two markets have effectively snapped into place over the last couple of decades. But the second bigger reason is that it feels like politics, and people don't want to bring up politics at work. They don't want to talk about the politics of their customers. What I do is I look at the worldview as liberal and conservative. I don't look at the politics. I don't look at what people vote for, or the policies. It's really more the values that these two groups have that shape the things they buy, the brands they align with, the media they consume, and there are some pretty big distinctions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know there's a lot of pressure to not target based on politics for sometimes legal reasons. Is that ever an issue for businesses?
I haven't heard it come up as a result for legal reasons, but it comes up that people are just very sensitive about it. And one of the most interesting insights that came out of the research was that people think that if you look at customers through this lens, you might upset somebody. The fact is, there's no such thing as a business that doesn't lean a bit liberal or a bit conservative, some more than others. There's no such thing, after having looked at this, of neutrality. No one is actually perfectly neutral. And if businesses simply ask the question, whether they're small or big, are my customers more liberal or conservative, they will find a skew and it might surprise them. And then the questions all start to come up. Why are they that way? And how do we reinforce that without getting into politics? Or is that what the market reflects? And is this really how we can grow in the most effective way? It's basically revealing a new insight about customers it's like looking at customers as male or female or high income or lower income or in different parts of the country. It's really become a fundamental attribute of customers that we can now look at. And because it's new, it's a new source of growth.
Yeah. So is the theory that aligning with some of the values of your customers and better understanding those values going to lead to increased sales and increased customer retention?
Absolutely. And basically, it's fundamentally about aligning your marketing to your market. This is just a different dimension. And what's interesting is the broader business press will come out with pretty big articles about this, like The Economist just published a pretty big article on exactly this topic, pointing out how the two groups are two different markets. And the Wall Street Journal will run articles about, here are all the different brands that align with one side or the other. But what they don't do is they don't get into why they align with those two different sides. What are the values that the two groups hold? And then what can businesses do to understand that in order to drive growth? So if your customers skew liberal, there is opportunity to strengthen the fit with that group without upsetting any conservative portion of your customer group, and vice versa if your customers skew conservative. And we're working with two brands right now at our business that brings this to life called LifeMind. And one has overwhelmingly liberal customers, one has overwhelmingly conservative customers. One is an extremely well known global mobile app, the other is a fitness product. And it then reveals different ways of talking to your customers, different media that they consume, because there's no such thing as a medium that is also perfectly neutral. And it doesn't matter like whether it's TV shows or digital consumption or audio, there's always a skew. And it's all about aligning with the group that makes the most sense for the business and then doing it in a non-judgmental and a non-judgmental way that taps into values versus politics.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Before we get into like background stuff, I'm just curious, do you have any examples of maybe businesses that have clientele that skew one way or another and how those businesses have tailored their messaging and their values to those customers?
Yeah, so this can happen one of two ways. It can happen through almost like sheer luck, in which case it creates a tailwind for the business, or it can happen in an intentional way. Now, the two businesses that I profile in the book, one is apartments.com and one is WeatherTech. Apartments.com helps people find apartments. It's a platform for seeking apartments. People who live in apartments skew quite liberal because they're in higher density population areas. And you've got a relatively liberal founder of the business, and then you have advertising that taps into values that tend to be more liberal. It's all about the future with Jeff Goldblum and inventing the apartment internet. And it's a really fun concept, but woven into that concept are all kinds of attributes that would appeal to a more liberal audience. And they're a very successful company. On the flip side, WeatherTech sells rubber mats for car owners, right? And they've run Super Bowl ads for years, and their advertising tends to reflect more conservative values. They have these militaristic helicopters sometimes that drop people down and into the suburbs, and they install the rubber mats into the cars in a kind of an interesting way. Well, the founder of WeatherTech is conservative, and the marketing reflects more conservative values, and the market itself skews a little bit conservative, but not as much as, say, the apartments.com example skews liberal. But in both cases, you have very successful companies that have fairly significant skews toward one market or the other. So it's not a question of, oh, I need to appeal to both equally so I don't get into trouble, because actually that's extremely hard to do. And it may not be the right answer for the business.
That makes a lot of sense. Cool. Well, I'm sure we'll revisit that, but I want to take a step back and learn a little bit more about your background, because you mentioned founding multiple digital marketing agencies. I'm curious, what was that journey like? Where did you start, and what was that? Tell us the story of that.
Yeah, sure. So when I came out of school, I got into marketing and I started on the creative side as a copywriter. And I quickly found that business was more creative to me than actual creative work in advertising. And I also realized that other people were much better copywriters than myself. So I became more of a business person, and I started one of the first digital direct marketing agencies. It was in the early to mid 90s. We had Netscape as a client. I don't know if you remember that name, it's one of the first big internet companies. And we worked with global brands because it was very hot at the time. It was a wonderful time, similar to today with AI. It was just an incredible time to be involved with direct marketing and the internet. So we grew, and we were acquired by Publicis Group, one of the global ad networks, where I was CEO of Publicis Dialogue in San Francisco. But once my contract was up there, I was itching to go start another firm. So I founded another digital agency that was focused on content marketing, and it was before content marketing was even called content marketing. I was just more into using longer form and content as a way to go to market. And that turned out to be a pretty successful strategy. And we were acquired by a mid-sized agency up in Portland, where I worked with a lot of DTC brands and ended up working a lot on the television side. But throughout all of that, I was always interested in the creative and the media and the analytics. The analytics was always of great interest to me because I wanted to see what people did. It was that moment of truth when you make a campaign go live, and are you hearing crickets chirping, or are you seeing some real traction in the market? And so the analytics is such a huge part of that. And then it's a question of why was it successful? Or why did it not work? Sometimes it's the failures that you learn the most from, as painful as they are. When you have a successful campaign, everyone is very happy, everyone claims credit, but you don't learn that much. And I always found that it was the failures where I could identify the things that would make me better at what I did.
Yeah, that is really interesting. It seems like a common theme was catching these early trends in
Yes,
new marketing optimization and just different marketing areas and advertising areas, and then building processes for how businesses can adopt those new practices, and then probably a lot of selling and sales and
that's right.
connecting with the right companies. So this is almost a formula that you built and then you replicated it for different burgeoning fields.
Yeah, and in many cases, you end up if you're involved in something early enough, you end up being forced to give it away in the beginning because no one believes you. Okay. So if you can imagine in the early days of internet marketing, now we happen to it was this remarkable coincidence. We had some B2B clients like Bay Networks and 3Com, and they were the companies putting people on the internet. And the market was IT managers. And some of the earliest digital media was for IT managers, okay, because they were involved with it. And we ended up going to clients and saying, hey, look, there's this thing called the internet. We can drive digital direct marketing using it. And there was a lot of suspicion. If today, of course, it's laughable, but we gave away a couple campaigns. We paid for the media, the creative, everything. And as soon as we did that, the numbers just took care of themselves. There was zero competition in the marketplace at the time. And so the results were just crazy strong. And then all the clients were like, okay, we want more of that. Same thing with content marketing. It was a different idea at the time. Had to give some of it away, and then it gets traction. And my latest venture, which folds in ideas from the book, lifemind.ai. AI is this next step, and I think it's a lot easier for people to get to grasp what the value of AI versus maybe the early days of the internet. But it feels like very similar time where if someone calls themselves an expert, then you can be suspicious because it's just so new and everyone's trying to figure it out. And when I meet other people who are starting businesses in AI, it's the same thing. Everyone's trying to figure it out. Everyone's trying to come up with the best practices, like you said, and that's what I enjoy the most, I think, is like that sense that you're creating something new and you're helping build something that other people have not built before.
Yeah, so tell us about lifemind.ai, your latest venture.
Yeah. So once I got deep into the book and thinking about the values that those two groups have, the liberals and conservatives, I started thinking more broadly about how marketing should do a kind of a pivot in terms of how you think about customers. And that pivot involves, instead of looking at customers under a microscope, is to actually look through the customer's eyes at your business. Okay. And that to me was a bit of a revelation. I wish I had thought that way decades before, but it's almost like stepping outside of yourself, putting your values aside, your judgments, and saying, what does my market see and what do they think about when they look at my business, my products, my brand? And it's fundamentally a different stance. And as I was working on that, I reconnected with my first business partner. And we decided that the best way to bring all this to life was actually through AI. And we realized that this dimension of liberal and conservative was very strong, but we wanted to combine it with generational values and also regional values. So we developed a proprietary map of the United States. We encoded 41,000 zip codes with distinct sets of values. And so we've got 16 distinct value regions, 4 different generations, and 2 different worldviews as liberal and conservative. And we combine all of that into a form of geo-targeting and a way that AI can take it and then express the values in creative. Because one of the most fascinating parts of this has been allowing AI to take input using values, like the values of a local customer, and then expressing a product back at you, a brand back at you, in a manner that you couldn't have imagined because they're not your values. So the first few times we saw creative develop this way, my immediate reaction was, I would never write that. But I knew why. I knew that my values were different from the markets. And this was an interesting way to think about AI as kind of a disinterested third party that could almost adopt the stance of the customer and tell you what they want to hear from you in terms of marketing the product. So we're basically launching in about a month a self-service platform where people can upload some customer data, not PII, and immediately access the distinct value sets of their customers, liberal, conservative, generation, and regional, and then bring all that to life in content and targeting. So it's very exciting. No one else is doing it. There's certainly a lot of AI platforms in the marketing space that tend to be focused on creative content and productivity and getting things done quicker. This is more focused on starting with who your customers are and knowing them first, and then expressing the marketing in an interesting way that aligns with how they want to see a product or brand.
That is so cool. I remember chatting about it, and we'll have a link to that tool in the description of this podcast. The viewers can check it out. That is such an interesting application of AI, and I think a really useful one that, like you said, is really it's not a common application, which is good. This seems to be a common theme of yours, that you're scoping out these greenfield opportunities where there are fewer competitors. Along those lines, before I get into that, has that been a focus for you in all of these business ventures, is ensuring that you're not entering into a super competitive space and just at the ground level making the whole process easier because you're not competing with a lot of people?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It's and the way I've told some people about it's funny, which is I'm so competitive, I don't want to compete. It's like the idea of competing gets me so fired up that I don't want any competition. And now that can take you down some paths of it's risky, right? Because you can end up going down a path where you create something that simply no one cares about, right? So the trick is really identifying like a rising tide, whether it was the internet, content marketing, or AI, becoming part of that and doing something interesting within an existing rising tide, and not trying to focus on something that falls out of the sky and you're not really sure if it's going to be worth anything. But yeah, I think that has been a theme. I really don't want to see a single competitor for anything I do, which is really hard. But if you move quick enough, you can make it happen.
That is super interesting. This idea has been bouncing around in my head that a lot of businesses are now thinking about how to optimize towards large language models and making sure that their business shows up in the top ranks. It's like an SEO area, but different than SEO because the LLMs scan websites and just determine who to recommend differently than traditional search engines.
That's right.
So that feels like a green space area right now that everybody's just still trying to figure out what the best practices are. And then I think that will tie into another green space area that will come up in the next few months, which is paid placement in the LLM search results. So it's a rumor that OpenAI is going to start offering paid advertising in the results. And I think it just is a logical next step when you have a tool that has a free tier, that there's some level of monetization that will be applied to that. Is
Right.
is that the sort of thing that you would see as a green space area with fewer competitors?
I think I think the search space really does get blown up with AI, and I think they're clearly trying to figure it out. I've noticed that Google has already started moving down their AI results below some advertising, whereas before it was always above the advertising. Clearly, they were cannibalizing revenue from their search advertising. So someone made a decision, hey, wait a minute. But yeah, I mean, it really, and I love that. It's just to see an industry like that turned upside down, I think it's about time, right? And I think there's all kinds of creative opportunities there. And I think sorting out like how to play in search these days, like I've read about optimizing search toward AI driven shopping bots. So bots that help people find the types of products that they like. So then how do you optimize search against those? That's small organizations, entrepreneurs, small businesses can move quickly in that space. And that's what makes it fun and exciting. But yeah, I think there's all kinds of interesting areas in marketing. I think the whole, oh, we develop creative content, that's all we do is, I don't know. I think there's about 100 companies that do that. And I don't know how many are going to survive. There has to be something unique and differentiating. And in our case, we rely on a lot of data that is proprietary to us. So we feel pretty safe with that. But yeah, I mean, it's such a great time to play in this and experiment. And I think individual people can do it. That's what's also so great about it, because it's just inherent to AI versus say when we were getting started with the internet in the early to mid 90s. It wasn't easy at all. You were buying these workstations that cost $30,000 that today would be worthless just to get yourself on the web and just to host a simple all gray website, because most people probably don't remember that all websites used to be gray in the background. And then all of a sudden they flipped a switch and said, no, you can do color now. But I think the opportunities today are fantastic.
Yeah, that is super interesting. I'm curious about going back to lifemind.ai. Let's say that a business has different customers with different worldviews, and let's say it's split down the middle. Would you recommend that the business speaks to the different cohorts in different ways? And is there any risk to that, to having totally different positioning for different types of customers?
It depends on the type of business, right? If you're, first of all, I've yet to see a brand split down the middle. I've never seen it. And I've looked at a lot of these now. And I've seen one that was, I think it was about 55-45. That was the closest I got. And that's pretty close to 50-50, but I can tell you, most of them are not. But let's say that it is 50-50, right? You've got two choices. You can try to appeal to both. And in the book, I outlined the set of values that are actually more American values. They're more related to American dream. And they're values that I can read off some examples like independence and self-determination, competition, productivity, ingenuity, directness, underdog, friendliness, and informality. These are all common American values, okay? Whereas other values like how the two groups think about the future, how they think about change, how they think about self-image, winning, success, they all have distinct visions for that. But to your question, a business can try to appeal to both, but I think it's richer territory to go a little deeper into both. And if you're using digital media, then you can do this quite easily. You can even do it with television if you want to, because honestly, every television show skews one way or the other. People don't realize it. For example, How to Get Away with Murder in Modern Family skew almost overwhelmingly liberal. SEAL Team and Last Man Standing skew almost overwhelmingly conservative. But no one looks at that, right? So you can actually run parallel campaigns pretty easily and just to do some testing. And you probably start with digital media, honestly, on that front. But I think if you stick to the values and the worldview, there really isn't risk, because it's not that somebody's going to get mad at your advertising if you're not reflecting their values. It's more that it fades into the background. And that's the bigger risk. When you project a set of values that's for the wrong group, it just disappears. It just fades away, and it becomes wasted investment.
Yeah. So would you say that the future of this sort of personalized value-based marketing could extend to even the individual level? Could there be a future where instead of looking at political differences as a proxy for individual values, or political values as a proxy for individual values, could we eventually at a certain point reach a point where we know the individual values and just speak to every customer or prospect individually?
Yeah, so I think the possibility is there, but I think in practical terms, it's going to be very difficult. At LifeMind, we've identified worldview as liberal and conservative values, generational values, and 16 regions in the US and those distinct values. You combine all those, it comes out to be something like 160 or 170 potential segments. And the reason we don't pursue doing this at the individual level is because we're looking to describe groups of people, and we find that at the individual level, this kind of stuff can break down. If someone tries to relate themselves personally to this kind of stuff, you can find exceptions pretty easily. But also the targeting, like if you get down to the individual level, you then have to ask, how am I going to target these people individually? And if you stick to generation, worldview, and region, these are all highly targetable using simple geography, quite honestly. Liberals tend to be more urban. Conservatives tend to be a little bit more ex-urban rural. Of course, there are exceptions. It's not absolute. 16 regions is geographic. And the 4 generations, that's the hardest thing to do geographically, but it is possible. There are areas that skew younger and older. So we look at pairs of generations on that front. But I think in terms of where the world is going, in terms of privacy and security, staying at a kind of a cohort group level feels pretty good to us right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's definitely in the current environment, that is the most practical way to go about it. Yeah, I'm very curious how personalized marketing will evolve in the future. I have a feeling that the markets will figure out a solution because I feel like there's a lot of money to be made in these hyper personalized advertising market. And I think that there are barriers right now with maintaining PII security. But I'm curious what you think. Do you think that the private markets will eventually come up with some kind of a greater standard for making sure that people's identities are protected while still allowing for pretty personalized targeting? Or do you think that the general market is shifting away from that and we probably won't return to super personalized targeting?
If you ask me in a couple of months, I might have a different answer, but I get the feeling now that there's movement away from that only because of privacy concerns. And if you even look at like programmatic advertising, it's really not at the individual level. You're still looking at just very discrete targeting data sets. And then you have to look at, okay, if I can solve at the individual level, how scalable is it going to be? Is it really going to help me grow? Because sometimes I see these micro targeting opportunities that sound very interesting, especially within programmatic advertising, but they aren't scalable. And sometimes I'm suspicious of the data sets themselves. I've looked over data sets and I'm like, I've dug a little deeper behind them. And you find things like, oh, here's a way to target people who are about to buy a home. And then you dig a little deeper. And so these are people whose mobile phone came within 5 miles of a real estate for sale sign. But there's such demand for it that they will sell that data set. Okay. My feeling is when I talk to other people, it's finding a smart solution that shifts a bit away from the individual and away from individual identity is probably the way to go. Although the industry is always trying to promise and pursue marketing at the individual level with the promise to be more relevant. And I've been hearing it for, I don't know, 25 years, and I haven't seen it yet, unless you're talking about remarketing or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to watch how the industry evolves and this sort of give and take between lawmakers and businesses and consumers, and just seeing all the walled gardens go up. In one of the recent episodes, we talked about how Apple is constructing their own walled garden around iOS devices and brokering that data. So it's interesting how everybody's playing defense with their own data, and we're moving into a very privatized version of data processing rather than a sharing of data across businesses. And I think part of it is privacy and part of it is profit, and just being able to really own and monetize your data as much as you can.
Yeah, and even the targeting algorithms, I don't think I think there was a period where you would allow platforms to just run with your marketing with the idea that it would be smarter at improving performance. And now I'm hearing that's actually not working out so well for a lot of brands, and they're pulling back investment. And I think there needs to be new solutions put on the table where you don't put all of your investment in the hands of the people trying to sell you advertising, because to your point, a lot of it's financial. And if I'm running an algorithm at a large platform, I'm going to want to optimize my business probably a little bit more than I want to optimize your business. And I think what we need are smarter solutions to get around that. And I think doing something through values-based marketing is a possible solution for some brands because it can enable a very simple form of targeting and it can allow you to test something outside of targeting algorithms.
Awesome. Yeah, that is super interesting. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining the podcast. This has been a really excellent conversation. I want to remind the audience to buy Chris's book, Red and Blue Customers: How to Drive Growth and Manage Risk in Today's Conservative and Liberal Markets, and visit lifemind.ai. We'll have a link in the description of this episode to check out the different values of your customers using non-PII data. Check it out, see if you get some value from it. And thank you again, Chris. This has been such a great conversation.
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk to you soon.